of a 5-minute free-for-all on each issue.
We'll be ready tonight.
But if Quayle is nervous, there is the risk of stumbling. He admitted this afternoon he is preoccupied. As he toured a jobs training center, Quayle tried retelling the old parable about teaching a man to fish so he can feed himself for life.
If you give a person a fish, they'll fish for a day. But if you train the person to fish, they'll fish for a lifetime. And they'll live for a lifetime. And that is our philosophy.
Quayle's strategy is to aim not just at Al Gore, but at the top of the Democratic ticket, to damage Bill Clinton on issues such as character in ways President Bush can exploit in the 2 remaining debates. Ann Compton, ABC News, Atlanta.
The 2 most visible vice presidential candidates have some things in common. Senator Gore and Vice President Quayle are almost the same age, served together in the Senate at one point on the same committee. ABC's Jackie Judd has been traveling with the Gore campaign.
How you doing?
Gore didn't stray from his regular schedule, not even today.
Can you give me 5?
For months, he has performed with the diligence of a class president, the Clinton booster, carrying the campaign's message across the country. Tonight, he intends to do the same, sell Clinton as the agent of change and condemn Republican economics.
They have driven our country into the ditch.
He may go further. As a senator with international experience, Gore has taken the lead in criticizing President Bush on the Iran-Contra scandal.
George Bush was arguing in favor of swapping arms for hostages, directly contrary to the law.
Gore held mock debates inside this Tennessee barn. Aides say he prepared for Quayle to attack him as an environmental extremist and a tax and spend liberal. Up to now, Gore hasn't criticized his former Senate colleague, but he's prepared to do that tonight to make the point that Quayle isn't qualified to be a heartbeat away from the presidency. Jackie Judd, ABC News, Atlanta.
The least familiar man in tonight's debate is Ross Perot's running mate. Based on what we've learned this year, least familiar may be an advantage. Admiral James Bond Stockdale has long been admired for the courage and defiance he showed while a prisoner of the North Vietnamese. Since then, he has turned philosopher and led a very private life. Up until now, here's ABC's Morton Dean.
It's not political posturing when this candidate quotes the classics and the Greek philosophers. He's not a politician. He's a scholar.
I looked for the Epictetus quote that would give me power in this clutch, and I settled for this. A life not put to the test is not worth living.
And when this candidate talks about being put to the test, it's not political rhetoric. He was a combat pilot. This is a mission he filmed. Stockdale had led the first airstrike into North Vietnam, and later, in 1965, was shot down. He spent 7.5 years as a POW, one of the highest-ranking Americans held. He organized the POWs, buoyed their spirits. He even bloodied and scarred his own face to avoid being used in some propaganda films.
Ladies and gentlemen, Captain James Stockdale.
The end of the war did not mean the end of the suffering. Some of his injuries were permanent. His courage not only brought him the gratitude of his fellow prisoners, it brought him the Medal of Honor. The link to Ross Perot was forged back then. Perot had helped Mrs. Stockdale publicize the plight of the POWs. He has never held office or run for office, and has spent 11 years studying and writing at the Hoover Institution, a California think tank. But he candidly admits not giving much thought to many of the major political issues.
I'm for free choice, there's no question about that, in the case of abortion, and I love the trees, and I want them to prosper, and I don't want us to brutalize the forests.
The 68-year-old Naval Academy graduate was a Republican. He's become an independent, and as unlikely a candidate as he is, he sees no problem handling the vice presidency.
It looks like a pretty ordinary job to me, as a matter of fact, from what I observe from the sidelines. I can't see how I could fail.
Morton Dean, ABC News, Dallas.
May be very interesting. Stay with us. The debate begins in about 25 minutes right here. In just a moment, the investigation of the FBI Director William Sessions. On the American agenda tonight, where the candidates stand on education. And guess who is teaching the University of Arizona football team how to pump iron?
This is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Brought to you by the makers of Advil.
When I hear the rain, I know I'm in for it. The dampness, the chill. Arthritis pain seems to come from every joint in my body. For pain like this, now instead of aspirin, I take Advil. Advil contains the same medicine my doctor often prescribes for arthritis pain. In fact, for minor arthritis pain, doctors recommend Advil most. With Advil, I'm on my way. Advil, tablets and caplets. Advanced medicine for pain.
Introducing new Pepperidge Farm gravy.
Hey, mind if I taste it?
Well, okay, sure. It's made with natural meat stocks, juices, and tender pieces of meat.
Tastes delicious.
Well, it's not surprising. In a taste test, gravy lovers preferred new Pepperidge Farm gravy over Heinz. In fact, it tastes so good, you'll never guess it's 98% fat-free.
Absolutely delicious. Thanks.
Yep. In a taste test against Heinz, it really cleaned up. New Pepperidge Farm gravy, preferred by gravy lovers.
There are new developments today in the Justice Department's ethics investigation of FBI Director William Sessions, his wife, and one of his aides. ABC's Sam Donaldson, who broke the story here last night, says 2 allegations about Judge Sessions have been referred to the criminal division of the Justice Department.
What the 2 matters referred to the Justice Department's criminal division are is unclear to outsiders, but it is significant that they are allegations against Sessions himself for alleged abuse of office, not allegations against his wife Alice or a member of his staff. A Justice Department official would say only that they are very serious matters. Other allegations being investigated administratively have to do with Mrs. Sessions, such as her alleged misuse of government automobiles and personnel. The overall investigation of the FBI director came about because of 2 letters. An anonymous letter alleging improprieties, including the charge that Sessions had arranged official speeches for places where he wanted a vacation at government expense. And a signed letter from reporter Ron Kessler to the FBI posing questions about Mrs. Sessions. For instance, why did Mrs. Sessions have a special FBI pass and use it to take her friends past regular security checkpoints? Other questions had to do with Sessions' administrative assistant, Sarah Munford. Kessler believes all this will eventually add up to Sessions' departure.
Many of the top FBI officials over the years have talked to Sessions about some of these abuses, warned him that they should be stopped, and he's ignored them. And some of these officials have told me that they believe that when these come out, if they come out, he will be removed or will have to resign.
Sources friendly to Sessions and his wife say the Justice Department is trying to force him out because he has resisted the Bush administration's efforts to politicize the FBI. In a written statement late today, Sessions himself said, "I welcome the inquiry and am confident of the outcome." But the Justice Department turned up the heat. Deputy Attorney General George Terwilliger wrote Sessions demanding he fire his administrative assistant, Sarah Munford. Sam Donaldson, ABC News, Washington.
In other news today, the Nobel Prize for Economics was awarded to a professor at the University of Chicago. Gary Becker's theories were at one time quite controversial, that economic principles explain a wide range of human behavior, everything from crime rates to the way families make everyday decisions. On Wall Street today, the Dow Jones Industrials gained another 27 points to close at 3201, and the trading was heavy. There is a warning tonight for people looking for information about AIDS. A study of 33 AIDS hotlines done by a New Jersey hospital found that callers often received answers that were misleading, oversimplified, or completely wrong. Sometimes repeated calls to the same hotline resulted in different answers to the same question, depending on who picked up the phone. We'll be looking into this. The daring attempt to save the life of a woman by giving her a pig's liver has failed. She died last night in a Los Angeles hospital before doctors could replace the pig's liver with one from a human donor. In a moment, the earthquake in Cairo, why the death toll has been so high.
Well, it's here. Time for me to step down and retire as chairman of Chrysler. And hey, anybody that goes out wants to go out with a bang. And we've got a bang that'll be heard from Germany to Japan. It's a new car design that's as revolutionary as our minivan was. It's going to change the way cars are designed from now on. We call it cab forward. What we did was move the windshield forward. Then we pulled the rear wheels back. made the rear doors wider and easier to get through, and increased the width. Believe me, this does more than just improve the looks. It gives you a lot more room inside, it rides better, and it's easier to handle. I think cab forward, like our minivan, is going to get copied by everybody. It has to, just because it makes so much sense. You know, I got to tell you, when it's your last turn at bat, it sure is nice to hit a home run.
Wilford Brimley for new Quaker Oats Plus Fiber.
Every day should feel this good.
Maybe what you need to help feel your best is a good high-fiber cereal. In that case, Quaker's got some good news for you. Quaker Oats Plus Fiber. It's brand new, and it's got as much fiber as a lot of those cold high fibers. But this one, hot Quaker Oats.
Every day should feel this good.
In Cairo, the number of people who died as a result of yesterday's earthquake is now up to more than 400. Several thousand people have been injured. Take a look at this home video as the earthquake was beginning. And listen. You can hear the screams in the distance. The dust you see is from buildings simply crumbling. Cairo, the Egyptian capital, is one of the most overcrowded cities in the world. Badly constructed buildings there have been known to collapse without any warning at all, which helps to explain why this earthquake has been so destructive. ABC's Mark Litke is in Cairo.
In the heart of Cairo, hundreds of impoverished families are now living on the streets, their homes destroyed or seriously damaged. Our children are naked, she cries. We have nothing left, and no one has come to help us. Hospitals are barely coping with the thousands of casualties. Many are school children who were trampled in stampedes when the quake hit. Police and fire brigades are still digging through piles of rubble. A woman was pulled alive out of a collapsed 14-story building early this morning, but since then, only the dead. Egyptian officials now concede that most of the damaged structures here were either rickety and old, the type that should have been condemned long ago, or poorly constructed newer buildings with blatant violations of building codes. This has only added to the anger and fear. Though most of the buildings in this city of 12 million people appeared to come through unscathed, there's widespread concern that the quake caused structural damages that may not be evident for years. Tonight, the only structures that seem to inspire complete confidence here are the centuries-old pyramids, which survived the quake without a scratch. Mark Litke, ABC News, Cairo.
Still overseas in Tokyo today, the Japanese government announced that the country's crime rate has jumped to its highest level since World War II. An increase in robberies and burglaries is apparently responsible. Murder in Japan has actually gone down. But there is very active concern this may not continue to be the case because the number of guns is going up. Guns from the USA. Here's ABC's Bill Rediker.
A right-wing extremist tries to assassinate a politician. A drug addict is arrested after killing a cop. A national crackdown on Yakuza, Japan's organized crime gangs, nets hundreds of weapons. Japan's reputation as one of the safest countries in the world is changing. And it is handguns, many of them smuggled from America, that are being blamed.
I think Japan would become more dangerous place.
The guns arrive by sea and by air, buried in cargo containers, hidden in personal effects. During the past year, the number of confiscated guns has grown by more than 20%, and increasingly the owners are ordinary Japanese.
Until now, nearly all of the guns we captured belonged to gangs. But this year, 25% were found on citizens.
That's because the crackdown on organized crime here convinced many gang members to get rid of some of their guns, and they did it by selling them to ordinary citizens. Police also blame the U.S. recession. They say American gun traffickers have been forced to look overseas for business. In Japan, selling guns can be extremely lucrative.
This Colt 45 sells for about $330 in America. Here it sells for $6,500.
It is not fear of crime that makes Japanese want to arm themselves. They are fascinated with guns, even model guns, because firearms are strictly forbidden in Japan. So when Japanese go on vacation, many of them visit shooting ranges. 90% of the customers at this Honolulu range are Japanese. Police fear that when the tourists come home, they may want to buy a gun.
Very nice.
Oh, I'm very happy.
It's kind of like an addiction. Once they shoot, they can't stop.
Until the Japanese government finds a way to stop the gun smuggling, Japanese police are increasing the number of coastal patrols and tightening security around government leaders. Police admit that only a year ago, they were more worried about Japanese swords and knives than American guns. Bill Redeker, ABC News, Tokyo.
News today about a young boy from Sarajevo we saw on this broadcast a few weeks ago. 8-year-old Sasha Lopar, who was hit in the head by flying shrapnel while he was outside playing, was operated on yesterday in Geneva. Doctors today say he seems to be doing fine. He has no brain damage. We learned today that one of our former colleagues had died, Hughes Rudd, who was a familiar correspondent at CBS for 20 years before coming to ABC in 1979. He died in France, where he lived. He was 71. Over the course of his career, he established himself not only as a fine reporter, but a man blessed with a sense of humor. He also had an eye for an unusual story. We'll be back in a moment.
I'd let you drive the Camry, but you know nothing about it.
Multi-valve engine, high tensile steel construction, available ABS, driver's side airbag is standard.
You know nothing about
Ergonomics, panoramic cockpit, contoured seats, room for 5.
You don't have your glasses.
Contacts.
You're left-handed.
Uh-huh.
The 1993 Toyota Camry. Few cars actually move you. This is one.
Now at Red Lobster.
Well, we've got a new special tonight. It's got everything. Petite lobster and 2 kinds of shrimp for just $10.99.
Start with petite lobster tails, sweet and delicious. Add our savory scampi. Then our famous grilled shrimp to top off a terrific dinner.
It's new.
It's petite lobster and shrimp 2 different ways for a limited time, just $10.99.
It's delicious.
And it's only at Red Lobster.
I shampoo for dandruff, but my scalp still itches.
Now there's Scalpicin for deep scalp itch, not ordinary dandruff. It's clear liquid, not shampoo. With itch medicine doctors chose over these dandruff shampoo formulas.
The itch is gone.
Scalpicin.
Nighttime, one of the worst times for pain. Minor arthritis pain, muscle aches, pain that seems to go on. That's why you need Ultra Strength Bengay. With more pain relievers than we've ever had, you can say goodnight to your pain with Ultra Strength Bengay.
I can't believe this incredible sense of lightness. I feel so light that I could float away. Could it be Stefan? Or new I can't believe it's not butter light. After all, it does have 1/3 fewer calories than butter, no cholesterol, and of course, great taste. It must be new I can't believe it's not butter light. I don't know anyone named Stefan.
Taste the light fantastic. New I can't believe it's not butter light.
During these latter weeks of the presidential election campaign, we have been devoting time on the American agenda to the issues and paying more attention to those which you make clear are the most important, which is why we're going to spend the rest of the week concentrating on where the candidates stand and what they stand for on the essential subject of education. We'll begin with K through 12. All 3 presidential candidates agree that the system is in urgent need of reform. They disagree on what the federal government's role should be. Our education reporter is Bill Blakemore.
For a brief moment 3 years ago, Bush and Clinton seemed each other's best ally in the battle to renew American schools.
Well done, Bill. Well done. You did.
Congratulating each other at the first ever education summit with the nation's governors. President Bush convened it. Governor Clinton led in hammering out its reform goals. Since becoming governor in 1979, Clinton had pushed education as the key to improving life in Arkansas.
I care more about this than anything else. I think it is more important to the future of our state than anything else.
Governor Clinton has changed the general attitude and tone about education in Arkansas. He talked about education probably 365 days a year and pushed untold numbers of innovations.
His barrage of reforms required smaller classes, more advanced courses, made 8th graders pass a test on basics to get into high school. To help pay for all this, he got his legislature to agree to an unpopular sales tax. In return, he imposed new accountability, such as competency tests for teachers. Schools improved. Dropout rates fell dramatically. By the time of the summit, Clinton was regarded as one of the most effective education governors. George Bush first promised education reform in his '88 campaign.
I want to be the education president.
The summit, only 9 months into his term, set 6 goals for the year 2000. It was exactly the kind of leadership reformers wanted from the president.
This has been historic, and I pledge to you my determination to follow up in every way possible.
But then for 18 months, the White House produced no plan for achieving the goals. Responding to criticism of this lost momentum, Bush finally announced his reform plan in 1991. When you compare the Bush and Clinton plans, it's important to note they agree on some basics. Both want tough new standards of knowledge and a voluntary national testing system. Both want local schools and communities to have more freedom from central bureaucracies. But they differ on how to stimulate school reform. The Bush plan blames the education establishment for resisting reform and concentrates on trying to generate what it calls break-the-mold schools.
And each one of these schools would be a living example of how we can reinvent American education.
The plan has inspired school design teams around the country to compete for grants, and this has impressed reformers.
So all kinds of people that were sort of thinking about doing something about reform got themselves in gear, got acting, and so on.
But Clinton argues the Bush administration concentrates too much on future schools and fails to help existing schools with reforms that have been shown to work.
But I think we know what works, and we ought to be trying to improve all of our schools.
Clinton says he would work with the education establishment, which has endorsed him, to spread reform. And while state and local funds pay most of the education dollar, Clinton would raise the federal share from 6% to the 10% it was before 1980. Bush is proposing no increase in the percentage of federal money spent on schools, and this angers even some faithful Republicans.
We need more funding for Chapter 1, for example, which is education for the disadvantaged. And we need more funding for technology in education.
Ross Perot would cut federal education spending by about 15%, as he would all federal spending. Like Clinton, he believes the federal government should promote proven reforms. Like Clinton and Bush, he wants stronger national standards. But between the two leading candidates, the most dramatic disagreement is over how to give parents their choice of schools. We'll examine that tomorrow. Bill Blakemore, ABC News.
When we come back, the University of Arizona football team.
Lots of credit cards will give you a cash advance, but there could be a catch. Interest charges. Some credit cards charge them from day one, which is why you should use the Discover card. Pay your full monthly balance and a small transaction fee, and we'll give you a cash advance interest-free. How does that grab you? It pays to Discover.
3 years ago, when we introduced the Lexus LS400, it was hailed as nearly perfect. Our engineers took that as a challenge.
Who are you going to call the most this month?
My grandparents in Philippines.
My uncle, Subramaniam, who lives in Agra, India.
With Sprint's new program, The Most, you automatically save 20% off whoever you call the most each month.
I call Wim in the Netherlands.
And with The Most, you can also choose a plan that lets you save 20% on international calls.
A mom in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
My sister in Munich?
My sister in Sri Lanka.
Doesn't anyone have relatives in Buffalo anymore?
Tonight on Nightline, Quayle, Gore, Stockdale. Who won and who lost the vice presidential debate? Results of an ABC News poll tonight.
Finally from us this evening, a story that may erode some of the male prejudices which have grown up around college football. It is about how so many of these young college stars, so much admired by so many on the weekends, get themselves up to the levels of strength and agility that they do. A look behind the scenes at the University of Arizona has proved educational. Here's ABC's Dick Schaap.
The University of Arizona has a strong football team, strong enough to upset undefeated UCLA a week ago. Touchdown! Strong enough to come within a point of upsetting undefeated Miami the previous week. One reason for the Wildcats' strength is their workouts in the weight room, designed to make them more agile, more mobile, more powerful. Another reason is the coach who organizes and oversees the workouts, the strength coach, Coach Ritchie.
Come on, you got it.
Margaret Ritchie.
Drive it through, yes. Good job.
Meg Ritchie is a 39-year-old Scot who once won the NCAA shot put and discus championships and twice represented Great Britain in the Olympics. She came to Arizona on a track scholarship more than a decade ago, knowing almost nothing about football.
I hadn't a clue what was going on. I knew something was happening, but I was never quite sure what.
Now she's on the sidelines for every game.
I wouldn't say I was an expert, because if you stuck me upstairs with the X's nose, I'd be flummoxed a little bit. Now let it come all the way down, all the way down.
But Meg knows biceps and flexibility. She applied for and got her job 7 years ago.
The hook that got me to apply was there was no other woman doing this. That was the hook. That was the challenge.
Some players are startled to learn Arizona has a woman head strength coach, the only one with a major college team.
You were a wee bit tentative with them.
I sort of, thought a little bit, and I said, a woman? Well, when I got here and I saw her, she's not, your measly type-sized woman either.
At 180 pounds, 60 below her competitive weight, Ritchie can still bench press 250 pounds.
She's a lot stronger than 3/4 of the football team, so no one really messed with Meg, so.
Are you sorry that you never had a chance to play football?
I would have really, I've said this to several people, and they look at me like I'm crazy, but I would have loved to have had a go at playing linebacker.
She would have been a tough one. Dick Schaap, ABC News, Tucson.
Okay, that's our report on World News Tonight. I'm Peter Jennings. The vice presidential debate is next. Hope you'll stay with us. Good night.
This has been a presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source.
On the happy island of Jantique,
Cool. I don't want to be cool.
love is in the air.
You ever been with a Rastaman?
Stand up, bend over, and pull down your pants.
Dr. Davis.
Going to extremes.
Come back here.
Tonight on ABC.
When somebody get a hacksaw and cut this stupid handcuff from up this pervert.
I'm the only farmer in the United States Senate.
Chuck Grassley. He knows farming is more than just a way of life. It's the backbone of Iowa's economy. That's why he's been fighting to expand ethanol production. And on October 1st, Chuck Grassley won when President Bush announced changes to increase ethanol consumption. The result? More jobs and money for Iowa. That's good for Iowa and America.
My first job and first duty is to the people of Iowa.
Chuck Grassley, working hard like Iowa.
On the happy island of Jantique,
Yeah, man.
there's modern medicine,
You ever been with a Rastaman?
Stand up, bend over, and pull down your pants.
modern transportation,
I know a fellow who can get me out of this mess.
and modern romance.
Dr. Davis. Come back here.
Going to extremes.
When somebody get a hacksaw and cut this stupid handcuff from up this pervert.
Then stay tuned for Channel 5 News.
To laugh, to cry, to kiss your troubles goodbye. There's no place like Cheers.
Weeknights at 10:30, only on Channel 5.
Variably cloudy with evening temperatures in the 50s.
This is an ABC News special. The 92 Vote. Tonight, live from the campus of Georgia Tech in Atlanta, Georgia, the vice presidential debate. Now reporting from ABC News World Headquarters, Peter Jennings.
Good evening and welcome to the second political debate in 2 days. The vice presidential candidates, Dan Quayle, Al Gore, and James Stockdale, Ross Perot's running mate, are gathered and presumably ready there, as you can see, in the Fine Arts Theater at Georgia Tech. Tonight's debate format is intended to be a little more freewheeling than the first debate between Mr. Bush, Mr. Clinton, and Mr. Perot. There's a single moderator tonight. He's Hal Bruno, who's the political director at ABC News. And the format, unlike that of the first presidential debate, is actually intended to encourage debate. The three men here tonight will do what they can to strengthen the top of their ticket, but they are in each case more than merely adjuncts to the presidential candidates. Vice President Quayle would surely love this to be an occasion on which he puts away so many of his critics, many of whom have been making fun of him since he was chosen 4 years ago. Senator Gore, who ran unsuccessfully for president in '88, has been considered an asset to the Democratic ticket. Tonight he's going to have to show that it's a label he deserved. Admiral Stockdale is the unknown tonight and rather enjoying it. Said the moderator is ABC's Hal Bruno, and here they go.
Good evening from Atlanta, and welcome to the Vice Presidential Debate sponsored by the Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates. It's being held here in the Theater for the Arts on the campus of Georgia Tech. I'm Hal Bruno from ABC News, and I'm going to be moderating tonight's debate. The participants are Republican Vice President Dan Quayle, Democratic Senator Al Gore.
As it was with the presidential candidates, the tickets have been given away to their respective supporters, which you'll protect throughout the evening, I suspect.
And retired Vice Admiral James Stockdale, who is the vice presidential nominee for independent candidate Ross Perot. Now, the ground rules for tonight's debate. Each candidate will have 2 minutes for an opening statement. I will then present the issues to be discussed. For each topic, the candidates will have 1 minute and 15 seconds to respond. Then this will be followed by a 5-minute discussion period in which they can ask questions of each other if they so choose. Now, the order of response has been determined by a drawing and will rotate with each topic. At the end of the debate, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Our radio and TV audience should know that the candidates were given an equal allocation of auditorium seats for their supporters. So I'd like to ask the audience here in the theater to please refrain from applause or any partisan demonstration once the debate is underway, because it takes time away from the candidates. So with that plea from your moderator, let's get started. And we'll turn first to Senator Gore for his opening statement.
Good evening. It's great to be here in Atlanta for this debate, where America will be showcased to the world when the 1996 Olympics are put on right here. It's appropriate because, in a real sense, our discussion this evening will be about what kind of nation we want to be 4 years from now. It's also a pleasure to be with my two opponents this evening. Admiral Stockdale, may I say it's a special honor to share this stage with you. Those of us who served in Vietnam looked at you as a national hero even before you were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor. And Mr. Vice President, Dan, if I may, it was 16 years ago that you and I went to the Congress on the very first day together. I'll make you a deal this evening. If you don't try to compare George Bush to Harry Truman, I won't compare you to Jack Kennedy.
You remember the last time someone compared themselves to Jack Kennedy? You remember what they said?
Harry Truman, it's worth remembering, assumed the presidency when Franklin Roosevelt died here in Georgia. Only one of many occasions when fate thrust a vice president into the Oval Office in a time of crisis. It's something to think about during the debate this evening. But our real discussion is going to be about change. Bill Clinton and I stand for change because we don't believe our nation can stand 4 more years of what we've had under George Bush and Dan Quayle. When the recession came, they were like a deer caught in the headlights, paralyzed into inaction, blinded to the suffering and pain of bankruptcies and people who are unemployed. We have an environmental crisis, a health insurance crisis, substandard education. It is time for a change. Bill Clinton and I want to get our country moving forward again, put our people back to work, and create a bright future for the United States of America.
Thank you. Okay. The next statement will be from Vice President Quayle.
Well, thank you, Senator Gore, for reminding me about my performance in the 1988 vice presidential debate. This is 1992. Bill Clinton is running against President George Bush. There are two things that I'm going to stress during this debate. One, Bill Clinton's economic plan and his agenda will make matters much, much worse. He will raise your taxes, he will increase spending, he will make government bigger, jobs will be lost. Second, Bill Clinton does not have the strength nor the character to be President of the United States. Let us look at the agendas. President Bush wants to hold the line on taxes. Bill Clinton wants to raise taxes. President Bush is for a balanced budget amendment. Bill Clinton is opposed to it. We want to reform the legal system because it's too costly. Bill Clinton wants the status quo. We want to reform the health care system. Bill Clinton wants to ration health care. Bill Clinton wants to empower government. We want to empower people. In St. Louis, Missouri, in June of this year, Bill Clinton said this: America is the mockery of the world. He is wrong. At some time during these next 4 years, there is going to be a crisis. There will be an international crisis. I can't tell you where it's going to be. I can't even tell you the circumstances, but it will happen. We need a president who has the experience, who has been tested, who has the integrity and qualifications to handle the crisis. The president has been tested. The president has the integrity and the character. The choice is yours. You need to have a president you can trust. Can you really trust Bill Clinton?
Admiral Stockdale, your opening statement, please, sir.
Who am I? Why am I here? I'm not a politician. Everybody knows that. So don't expect me to use the language of the Washington Insider. 37 years in the Navy, and only one of them up there in Washington. And now I'm an academic. The centerpiece of my life was the Vietnam War. I was there the day it started. I led the first bombing raid against North Vietnam. I was there the day it ended, and I was there for everything in between. 10 years in Vietnam, aerial combat, and torture. I know things about the Vietnam War better than anybody in the world. I know some things about the Vietnam War better than anybody in the world. And I know how governments, how American governments can be courageous and how they can be callow. And that's important. That's one thing I'm an insider on. I was the leader of the underground of the American pilots who were shot down and imprisoned in North Vietnam. You should know that the American character displayed in those dungeons by those fine men was the thing of beauty. I look back on those years as the beginning of wisdom, learning everything a man can learn about the vulnerabilities and the strengths that are ours as Americans. Why am I here tonight? I am here because I have in my brain and in my heart what it takes to lead America through tough times.
Thank you, Admiral. I thought, since you're running for vice president, that we ought to start off by talking about the vice presidency itself. The vice president presides over the Senate. He casts the deciding vote in case of a tie, but his role really depends on the assignments that are given to him by the president. However, if a president should die in office or is unable to serve for any other reason, the vice president automatically becomes president, and that has happened 5 times in this century. So the proposition I put on the table for you to discuss is this: what role would each of you like to play as vice president? What areas interest you? And what are your qualifications to serve as president if necessary? In the case of Vice President Quayle, who we're starting with, I suppose you tell us the role that you did play in the first term and what you'd like to do in the second term. Go ahead, sir.
Well, then I won't give you that answer. Qualifications. I've been there, Hal. I've done the job. I've been tested. I've been vice president for 4 years. Senator Gore referred to us being elected to the Congress together in 1976. I've done the job. I've done many things for the president. But even as vice president, you never know exactly what your role is going to be from time to time. And let me just give you an example of where I was tested under fire and in a crisis. President Bush was flying to Malta in 1989 to meet with President Gorbachev. It was the first meeting between President Bush and President Gorbachev. They had known each other before. A coup broke out in the Philippines. I had to go to the Situation Room. I had to assemble the president's advisors. I talked to President Aquino. I made the recommendation to the president. The president made the decision. The coup was suppressed. Democracy continued in the Philippines. The situation was ended. I've been there, and I'll tell you one other thing that qualifies you for being president, and it's this, Hal. You got to stand up for what you believe in. And nobody has ever criticized me for not having strong beliefs.
Admiral Stockdale.
My association with Mr. Perot is a very personal one. And as I have stood in and finally taken his running mate position, he has granted me total autonomy. I don't take advantage of it, but I am sure that he would make me a partner in decisions, in making decisions about the way to handle health care, the way to get this economy back on its feet again, in every way. I have not had the experience of these gentlemen, but to be any more specific, but I know I have his trust, and I intend to act in a way to keep that situation alive. Thank you.
Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton understands the meaning of the words teamwork and partnership. If we're successful in our efforts to gain your trust and lead this nation, we will work together to put our country back on the right track again. The experience that George Bush and Dan Quayle have been talking about includes the worst economic performance since the Great Depression. Unemployment is up, personal income is down, bankruptcies are up, housing starts are down. How long can we continue with trickle-down economics when the record of failure is so abundantly clear? Discussions of the vice presidency tend sometimes to focus on the crisis during which a vice president is thrust into the Oval Office. And indeed, 1/3 of the vice presidents who have served have been moved into the White House. But the teamwork and partnership beforehand, and hopefully that situation never happens, how you work together is critically important. The way we've worked together in this campaign is one sample. Now, I'd like to say in response to Vice President Quayle, he talked about Malta and the Philippines. George Bush has concentrated on every other country in the world. When are you guys going to start worrying about our people here in the United States of America and get our country moving again?
Well, again, I will ask the audience, please do not applause. It takes time from the candidates. All right. Now we have 5 minutes for discussion.
Well,
and go ahead, Vice President Quayle.
The answer to that is very simple, that we are not going to raise taxes to create new jobs. We have a plan to create new jobs, but that wasn't the question. The question dealt with qualifications. Teamwork and partnership may be fine in the Congress, Senator Gore. That's what Congress is all about, compromise, teamwork, working things out. But when you're President of the United States, or when you're Vice President, you have to fill in like I did the night of the crisis in the Philippines, you've got to make a decision. You've got to make up your mind. Bill Clinton, running for President of the United States, said this about the Persian Gulf War. He said, had I been in the Senate, I would have voted with the majority if it was a close vote. But I agreed with the arguments of the minority. You can't have it both ways. You have to make a decision. You cannot sit there in an international crisis and sit there and say, well, on one hand, this is okay, and on the other hand, this is okay. You've got to make the decision. President Bush has made the decisions. He's been tested. He's got the experience. He's got the qualification. He's got the integrity to be our president for the next 4 years.
Admiral Stockdale, it's your turn to respond next, and then Senator Gore will have his chance to respond.
Okay, I thought this was just an open session, this 5-minute thing, and I didn't have anything to add to his, but I will.
Well, I'll jump in if you don't.
I thought anyone could jump in whenever they wanted to.
Okay, it was whatever pleases you, gentlemen, is fine with me.
I'll let y'all figure out.
But I want Admiral Stockdale's time.
This is not the Senate. This is not the Senate where you can trade off time. Go ahead,
I'll
Senator
let y'all
Gore.
figure out the rules. I've got some points that I want to make here, and I still haven't gotten an answer to my question on when you guys are going to start worrying about this country. But I want to elaborate on it before.
Why doesn't the Democratic Congress pass the President's Jobs Bill?
Let him say his thoughts, and then you can come in.
Letting you get off that string of attacks. We've been listening to trickle-down economics for 12 years now, and y'all still support trickle-down to the very last drop. And you know, talking about this point of concentrating on every other country in the world as opposed to the people of our country right here at home, when George Bush took former Secretary of State Baker out of the State Department and put him in charge of the campaign and made him Chief of Staff in the White House, Mr. Baker, who's quite a capable man, said that for these last 4 years, George Bush was working on the problems of the rest of the world, and in the next 4 years, he would target America. Well, I want you to know we really appreciate that, but Bill Clinton and I will target America from day one. We won't wait 4 years before we concentrate on the problems in this country. He went on to say that it's really amazing what George Bush can do when he concentrates. Well, it's time that we had a president like Bill Clinton who can concentrate and will concentrate and work on the problems of real people in this country. You know, our country is in trouble. We simply cannot continue with this philosophy of giving huge tax cuts to the very wealthy, raising taxes on middle-income families the way Bush and Quayle have done, and then waiting for it to work. How much longer will it take, Dan, for trickle-down economics to work in your theory?
Well, we're going to have plenty of time to talk about trickle-down government, which you're for.
Well, I'd like to hear the answer.
But the question is, which you have failed to address, and that is, why is Bill Clinton qualified to be President of the United States? You've talked about Jim Baker. You've talked about trickle-down economics. You've talked about the worst economy in 50 years. You haven't told us one reason why Bill Clinton is qualified to be President of the United States.
I'll be happy to.
I want to go back and make a point.
Well, you've asked me a question. If you want to answer my question, I will answer yours.
I've made a statement. I have not asked a question. I've made a statement that you have not told us why Bill Clinton is qualified to be President of the United States. I pointed out what he said about the Persian Gulf War. But let me repeat it for you. Here's what he said, Senator. You know full well what he said.
You want me to answer your question?
I'm making a statement, then you can answer it.
All right. Can we give Admiral Stockdale a chance to come in here, please?
And again, audience. Here's what he said. If the vote, this is the Persian Gulf War, the most important event in his political lifetime. And here's what Bill Clinton says. If it was a close vote, I'd vote with the majority.
Right. Let's give Admiral Stockdale a chance to come in.
That qualifies you for being President of the United States. I hope America is listening very closely to this debate tonight.
And I think America is seeing right now the reason this nation is in gridlock. The trickle-downs and the tax and spends, or whatever you want to call them, are at swords points. We can't get this economy going. Over here we've got Dan, whose president is going to take 8 years to balance the budget. And on my left, the senator, whose boss is going to get it halfway balanced in 4 years. Ross Perot has got a plan to balance the budget 5 years in length from start to finish. And we're people of the non-professional category who are just sick of this terrible thing that's happened to the country. And we've got a man who knows how to fix it, and I'm working for him.
I was a little bit worried that there might not be a free-flowing discussion tonight. Thanks for Let's move on to the economy. Specifically, the economy was talked about at great length the other night in the presidential debate. let's talk about a very particular aspect of the economy, and that is getting people back to work. For the average person, the great fear is losing his or her job, and many Americans have lost jobs in this recession, which also means the loss of benefits, the loss of a home, a destruction of a family's security. Specifically, how would your administration go about getting people back to work, and how long is it going to take? And we start with Admiral Stockdale.
The lifeblood of our economy is investment. And right now, when we borrow $350 billion a year, it saps the money markets, and the private investors are not getting their share. What we do is work on that budget by an aggressive program, not a painful program, so that we can start borrowing less money and getting more investment money on the street through entrepreneurs who can build factories, who will hire people, and maybe we'll start manufacturing goods here in this country again. That's my answer.
Okay, Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton's top priority is putting America back to work. Bill Clinton and I will create good, high-wage jobs for our people, the same way he has done in his state. Bill Clinton has created high-wage manufacturing jobs at 10 times the national average. And in fact, according to the statistics coming from the Bush-Quayle Labor Department, for the last 2 years in a row, Bill Clinton's state has been #1 among all 50 in the creation of jobs in the private sector. By contrast, in the nation as a whole, during the last 4 years, it is the first time since the presidency of Herbert Hoover that we have gone for a 4-year period with fewer jobs at the end of that 4-year period than we had at the beginning. And look at manufacturing. We have lost 1.4 million jobs in manufacturing under George Bush and Dan Quayle. They have even, we learned 2 weeks ago, taken our tax dollars and subsidized the moving of U.S. factories to foreign countries. Now, don't deny it, because 60 Minutes and Nightline and the nation's newspapers have investigated this very carefully. When are you going to stop using our tax dollars to shut down American factories and move them to foreign countries and throw Americans out of work?
Vice President Quayle.
Senator, don't always believe what you see on television. Let me tell you, the media have been wrong before. We have never subsidized any country or any company to move from the United States to Latin America. You know full well the Caribbean Basin Initiative. You've supported that.
Nope.
That is a program there.
I voted against it.
You have voted for it in your record?
Nope.
Okay, well, we're going to have a lot of interesting debate after this debate. Our people will be glad to furnish the press, if they're interested, in Senator Gore's voting record on the Caribbean Basin Initiative. But let's talk. You know, you keep talking about trickle-down economics and all this stuff about the worst economy since Hoover. It is a bad economy. It's a tough economy. The question isn't it's not who you're going to blame. What are you going to do about it? Your proposal is to raise $150 billion in taxes, to raise $220 billion in new spending.
No.
How is raising taxes going to help small business? How is raising taxes going to help the farmer? How is raising taxes going to help the consumer of America? I submit to you that raising taxes will make matters much, much worse.
Okay, Admiral, we now throw it open for discussion. Admiral Stockdale, it's your turn to start the discussion.
Well, we've got to clean out the barn, if I may quote my boss, and start getting this investment money on the street so we can get and encourage entrepreneurs to build factories. The program is out there. It's a put together thing that requires some sacrifice, but not excessive. And we are willing to move forward on a 5-year clip to put us back where we can start over and get this nation straightened out.
Senator Gore,
well,
getting people back to work.
The difference between the Perot-Stockdale plan and the Clinton-Gore plan is that Ross Perot's plan concentrates almost exclusively on balancing the budget and reducing the budget deficit, And the danger is that if that is the only goal, it could throw our nation back into an even worse recession. Bill Clinton and I have a detailed 5-year budget plan to create good jobs, cut the budget deficit in half, and eliminate the investment deficit in order to get our economy moving forward again. We have a $20 billion infrastructure fund to create a nationwide network of high-speed rail, for example, and what are called information superhighways to open up a whole universe of knowledge for our young people and to help our universities and companies that rely on new advances in the information revolution. We also have tax incentives for investment in job-creating activities, not the kind of encouragement for short-term rip-offs like the proposal that we have had from George Bush. But I want to return and say one more time, you have used our tax dollars to subsidize the recruitment of U.S. companies to move overseas and throw Americans out of work. In Decaturville, Tennessee, not very far from my home, a factory was shut down right there when they were solicited by officials paid with U.S. taxpayers' money, and then the replacement workers in a foreign country were trained with our tax dollars, and then their imports were subsidized coming back into the United States. When are you going to stop that program?
We do not have any program that encourages companies to close down here and to go and invest in foreign soil. That is absolutely outrageous. Of course American businesses do have business abroad. We've got global competition. We want the businesses to expand. Do you realize this, Senator? That every job that's overseas, there's 3 jobs back here to support that? But never have we ever, and nor would we, support the idea of someone closing down a factory here and moving overseas. That's just totally ridiculous.
It's going on right now. No, it happened in Tennessee, in Decaturville, Tennessee. When George Bush went to Nashville, the employees who lost their jobs asked to meet with them. I talked with them. Let me tell you what they're feeling. Some of them are in their 50s and 60s. They want to know where they're going to get new jobs when their jobs have been destroyed. And there are 1.4 million manufacturing jobs that have been lost because of the policies of you and George Bush. Are we going to... do you seriously believe that we ought to continue the same policies that have created the worst economy since the Great Depression?
I hope that when you talk to those people, you said, and the first thing that Bill Clinton and I are going to do is raise $150 billion in new taxes.
You've got that wrong, too.
And the first, that is part of your plan, $150 billion in new taxes? Well, you're going to disavow your plan.
Listen, what we're proposing...
You know what you're doing? You know what you're doing? You're pulling a Clinton. And you know what a Clinton is? And you know what a Clinton is? A Clinton is what he says one thing one day and another thing the next day. You try to have both sides of the issues. The fact of the matter is that you are proposing $150 billion in new taxes.
No.
And I hope that you talk to the people in Tennessee and told them that you're going to have new taxes.
You can say it all you want, but it doesn't make it true.
I hope you talked to them about you were going to increase spending at $220 billion. I'm sure what you didn't talk to them about was about how we're going to reform the health care system, like the president wants to do. He wants to go out and to reform the health care system so that every American will have available to them affordable health insurance. I'm sure one other thing that you didn't talk to him about, Senator, and that is legal reform. Because your position on legal reform is the status quo. And yet you talk about foreign competition. Why should an American company have to spend 15 to 20 times on product liability insurance costs compared to a company in Japan or a company in Germany or somewhere else? That's not right. We have product liability reform legislation on Capitol Hill that will create jobs, and the Democratic Congress won't pass it.
Okay. I think it's time to move on to our next topic. All 3 of you gentlemen have some expertise in defense and the armed forces. Vice President Quayle and Senator Gore both served on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Admiral Stockdale, of course, has a very distinguished military career. With the end of the Cold War, everyone agrees that there's going to be major cuts. They're already started in the defense budget. But this country has a long history of neglecting its military needs in peacetime, then paying for it with heavy casualties when we're caught unprepared. How much of a defense cut is safe? What happens to the people who are forced to leave the military services, or if they lose their jobs because they're working in defense industries? I think we start with Senator Gore this time.
Bill Clinton and I support a strong national defense. He and I have both fought for change within the Democratic Party as well as within the country. In the aftermath of the Cold War, the definition of strong national defense has obviously changed somewhat. For example, George Bush wants to maintain at least 150,000 American soldiers in Europe, even though World War II ended 50 years ago. Bill Clinton and I agree with so many military experts who believe that it is time for the Europeans, who are so much wealthier now and more powerful than they were at the end of World War II, to start picking up a little more of that tab themselves and not rely so exclusively on the United States taxpayers for the defense of Europe. We believe that we can make savings in our defense budget and at the same time improve our national security. Now, for those who are affected by the cutbacks, whether they come from George Bush or Bill Clinton and me, the difference is Bill Clinton and I have a defense conversion program so that those who won the Cold War will not be left out in the cold. We want to put them to work, building an infrastructure and an economy here in this country for the 90s and the next century.
Vice President Quayle.
We won the Cold War because we invested in national security. We won the Cold War because we invested in our military. We didn't win we won the Cold War because America had the political will and made the right decisions. Yes, we can make the cuts in defense, and we have. Bill Clinton wants to cut defense another $60 billion. I'd say to the defense workers in California and elsewhere, $60 billion defense cut is going to cut a lot of jobs out. Yes, we are making a conversion, and we can go to a civil space rather than having a defense or the defense industry. But let me say this: we would not have won the Cold War if we had listened to Senator Gore and his crowd and had supported a nuclear freeze. If you would have supported that attitude, we would not have won the Cold War. We won the Cold War because we invested and we went forward.
Okay. Admiral Stockdale,
yes,
please.
thank you. The numbers in terms of the dollar cuts as they stand on our plans now show us almost the same as the Vice President's. But we note that Governor Clinton's plan is almost twice as much a cut as either one of us. I've been through the end of World War II and the surprise beginning of Korea to see how it cost us more money because we overcut the defense budget in the first place. I don't say that. So I think that should be eyed with great suspicion. People that are really kicking the props out from under our grand military establishment prematurely. Now there's other differences between the Perot approach and what we see up here on either side of me, and that has to do with we want to focus our interests, economic and military, more to the Pacific. We figure that we are generally going along with any sort of a troop removal from Europe. So that's still another face of this puzzle.
Okay, Senator Gore, would you like to start the discussion period on this topic?
I'd like to respond first to you, Admiral Stockdale. Under the details of our 5-year budget plan, we do propose more in defense cuts than George Bush and Dan Quayle, but only 5% more. Admiral Crow, who I think was one of your classmates in Annapolis, has endorsed the military portions of our plan, even though he was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs under George Bush, and John White has endorsed the economic aspects of our plan, even though I believe he was the architect of Ross Perot's economic plan. Now, when I heard George Bush say at the convention in Houston that when he heard the phrase, "we won the Cold War," it made him wonder who the "we" was. Well, I want to tell you, President Bush, the "we" is the people of the United States of America. This wasn't a partisan victory that came suddenly a few months after you took the oath of office. This started with Harry Truman, and it was a bipartisan effort from the very beginning. George Bush taking credit for the Berlin Wall coming down is like the rooster taking credit for the sunrise. Now, and I want to add one other thing, because in the debate a few nights ago, I think President Bush made a very serious misstatement of fact in response to Ross Perot. It was a kind of a little lecture he gave to Ross Perot when he said, "Those SS-18s are gone, Ross. That's done." He reached a deal with Boris Yeltsin to completely remove them so we can all sleep safely without any fear tonight. But you know what? They thought they were going to get that deal, but when he took the person in charge of the negotiations out of the State Department and put him in charge of the re-election campaign, the deal unraveled, and now there is no Start to deal at all. In fact, there are serious problems. Isn't it a fact, Dan, that every single one of those SS-18s is still there in the silos, and under the START 1 treaty, only half of the silos are supposed to be dismantled, and there is no deal to get rid of the other half. Didn't the President make a mistake there?
Vice President Quayle,
the President does have a commitment from Boris Yeltsin to eliminate the SS-18s. That is a commitment.
Is it an agreement?
It is a commitment, and Well, let's talk about.
Well, he said it's done.
Let him talk, Senator.
Just lighten up here, Al.
Go ahead.
Let's talk about getting agreements. You know, the President of the United States doesn't just negotiate with your friends in Congress. The President of the United States deals on the international scene. He's got to deal with the President of Russia. He's got to deal with the Chancellor of Germany, Prime Minister of Britain, President of France, Prime Minister of Japan. He's got to deal with a whole host of leaders around the world. And the leaders sit down and they will negotiate and they will come to agreements with people that they trust. And this is a fundamental problem with Bill Clinton, is trust and character. It is not the issue of how he avoided military service 20-some years ago. It's the fact. It's the fact that he does not tell the truth about it. He first said he didn't get an induction notice, then we find out that he did. He said he didn't have an ROTC slot, then we find out he did. He said he didn't use Senator Fulbright's office for special influence, then we find out that he did. These are inconsistencies. Bill Clinton has trouble telling the truth, and he will have a very difficult time dealing with somebody like President Yeltsin or Chancellor Kohl or Prime Minister Major or President Mitterrand, because truth and integrity are prerequisites to being President of the United States.
I want to respond to that. George Bush, in case you've forgotten, Dan, said, "Read my lips, no new taxes."
Read my lips.
And you know what?
I didn't think I was going to hear that tonight.
Hold on, let me finish.
Okay.
He also said he wanted to be the environmental president. Then he went on to say he wanted to be the education president. Then he said that he wouldn't raise taxes again. No, never, ever, ever. Then the next day, his spokesman, Marlon Fitzwater, came out and said, that's not a pledge. Then 2 weeks ago, he said that after the election, if you win, then James Baker's going to go back to be Secretary of State. Then a week later, in the debate a few nights ago, he said, no, after the election, if we win, James Baker is going to be in charge of domestic policy. Which is it, Dan? Is he going to, what's your role in this going to be?
Well, we'll have to move on to another topic. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Vice President. No,
I don't have time to respond to that.
You'll get plenty of chance to respond, so don't worry.
I was okay. You're the moderator. I was under the assumption that when they like that,
we ran out of time according to the agreement. It's time to move on, and I want to stick to the agreement.
You got the last word on that, but we'll come back to it.
But you'll have a chance. I can see what's happening here. We throw out the topic, and then we drift, but that's okay, because I think it's making for a healthy exchange. The only thing I would ask
I'm enjoying it.
The only thing I would ask of you gentlemen is when we get to the discussion period, whoever talks first, be considerate of the others, because you have a tendency to filibuster. Okay, let's go on.
Look over there.
Okay. I'm not pointing any fingers. Let's talk about the environment. We'll get away from controversy. Everyone wants a safe and clean environment. But there's an ongoing conflict between environmental protection and the need for economic growth and jobs. So the point I throw out on the table is, how do you resolve this conflict between protection of the environment and growth and jobs? And why has it taken so long to deal with basic problems such as toxic waste dumps, clean air, and clean water. And Vice President Quayle, it's your turn to start first.
Hell, that's a false choice. You don't have to have a choice between the environment and jobs. You can have both. Look at the President's record. Clean air legislation passed the Democratic Congress because of the leadership of George Bush. It is the most comprehensive Clean Air Act in our history. We are firmly behind preserving our environment, and we have a good record with which to stand. The question comes about what is going to be their position when it comes to the environment. I say it's a false choice. You ought to ask somebody in Michigan, a UAW worker in Michigan, if they're thinking increasing the CAFE standards, the fuel economy standards to 45 miles a gallon is a good idea. 300,000 people out of work. You ought to talk to the timber people in the Northwest, where they say that, well, we can only save the oil, forget about jobs. You ought to talk to the coal miners. They're talking about putting a coal tax on. They're talking a tax on utilities, a tax on gasoline, home heating oil, all sorts of taxes. No, Hal, the choice isn't the environment and jobs. With the right policies, prudent policies, we can have both.
Admiral Stockdale.
I read Senator Gore's book about environment, and I don't see how he could possibly pay for his proposals in today's economic climate. The Marshall Plan of Environment and so forth. And also, I'm told by some experts that the things that he fears most may not be all that dangerous, according to some scientists. You can overdo, I'm told, environmental cleaning up. If you purify the pond, the water lilies die. I love this planet, and I want it to stay here, but I don't like to have it the private property of fanatics that want to overdo this thing.
Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton and I believe we can create millions of new jobs by leading the environmental revolution instead of dragging our feet and bringing up the rear. You know, Japan and Germany are both openly proclaiming to the world now that the biggest new market in the history of world business is the market for the new products and technologies that foster economic progress without environmental destruction. Why is the Japanese business organization, the largest one they have, the Keidanren, arguing for tougher environmental standards than those embodied in U.S. law? Why is MITI, their trade organization, calling on all Japanese corporations everywhere in the world to exceed by as much as possible the environmental standards of every country in which they're operating? Well, maybe they're just dumb about business competition, but maybe they know something that George Bush and Dan Quayle don't know, that the future will call for greater efficiency and greater environmental efficiency. This is an issue that touches my basic values. I'm taught in my religious tradition that we are given dominion over the earth, but we're required to be good stewards of the earth, and that means to take care of it. We're not doing that now under the Bush-Quayle policies. They have gutted the Clean Air Act. They have broken his pledge to be the environmental president. Bill Clinton and I will change that.
Okay, discussion period now. Again, leave time for each other, please. Vice President Quayle, go ahead.
Oh, I'm tempted to yield to Admiral Stockdale on this. But the fact of the matter is that one of the proposals that Senator Gore has suggested is to have the taxpayers of America spend $100 billion a year on environmental projects in foreign countries.
Just not
foreign
true.
aid. Well, Senator, it's in your book on page 304.
No, it's not.
It is there. It is in your book. You know, Hal, I wanted to bring the Gore book tonight because I figured he was going to pull a Bill Clinton on me, and he has, because he's going to disavow what's in his book. It's in your book.
No.
It comes out to $100 billion of foreign aid for environmental projects.
Let's give him a chance to answer.
How are we going to pay for it? How are we going to pay for an extra $100 billion of the taxpayers' money for this?
Dan, I appreciate you reading my book very much, but you've got it wrong.
No, I've got it right.
There's no such proposal. There is no such...
Okay, well, we'll find
let him
out
talk,
afterwards.
Mr. Vice President. Let the Senator talk. Go ahead.
There is no such proposal. What I have called upon is a cooperative effort by the United States and Europe and Asia to work together in opening up new markets throughout the world for the new technologies that are necessary in order to reconcile the imperatives of economic progress with the imperatives of environmental protection. Take Mexico City for an example. They are shutting down factories right now, not because of their economy, but because they're choking to death on the air pollution. They're banning automobiles some days of the week. Now, what they want is not new laser-guided missile systems. What they want are new engines and new factories and new products that don't pollute the air and the water, but nevertheless allow them to have a decent standard of living for their people. Last year, 35% of our exports went to developing countries. Countries where the population is expanding worldwide by as much as 1 billion people every 10 years. We cannot stick our heads in the sand and pretend that we don't face a global environmental crisis. Nor should we assume that it's going to cost jobs. Quite the contrary. We are going to be able to create jobs, as Japan and Germany are planning to do right now, if we have the guts to lead. Now, earlier we heard about the auto industry and the timber industry. There have been 250,000 jobs lost in the automobile industry during the Reagan-Bush-Quayle years. There have been tens of thousands of jobs lost in the timber industry. What they like to do is to point the finger of blame with one hand and hand out pink slips with the other hand. They've done a poor job both with the economy and the environment. It's time for a change.
Admiral Stockdale, did you have something you wanted to say here?
I know that I read where Senator Gore's mentor had disagreed with some of the scientific data that is in his book. How do you respond to those criticisms of that sort? Do you
deny it?
Do you take this into account?
Let me respond. Thank you, Admiral, for saying that. You're talking about Roger Revelle. His family wrote a lengthy letter saying how terribly he had been misquoted and had his remarks taken completely out of context just before he died. He believed up until the day he died. No, it's true. He died last year. Please. And just before he died, he co-authored an article which had statements taken completely out of context. In fact, the vast majority of the world's scientists, and they have worked on this extensively, believe that we must have an effort to face up to the problems we face with the environment. And if we just stick our heads in the sand and pretend that it's not real, we're not doing ourselves a favor. Even worse than that, we're telling our children and all future generations that we weren't willing to face up to this obligation. I believe that we have a mandate to try to solve this problem, particularly when we can do it while we create jobs in the process.
Go ahead, Mr. Vice President. There's still time.
Yep.
Not much.
I know it. We got to have a little equal time here now, Hal. In the book, you also suggest taxes on gasoline, taxes on utilities, taxes on carbon, taxes on timber. There's a whole host of taxes, and I don't believe raising taxes is the way to solve our environmental problems. And you talk about the bad situation in the auto industry. You seem to say that the answer is, well, I'll just make it that much worse by increasing the CAFE standards. Yes, the auto industry is hurting. It's been hurting for a long time. And increasing the CAFE standards to 45 miles per gallon, like you and Bill Clinton are suggesting, will put, as I said, 300,000 people out of work.
Okay, let's move on now. I would like to remind the audience of one thing. Trying to stop you from applauding may be a lost cause. I didn't say anything about hissing, but I do think it is discourteous. And there's no call for that, and it reflects badly on the candidate you're supporting. So let's knock that off. Let's go on to health care. Health care protection has become a necessity of life in our society. Yet, millions of Americans are not insured, and the cost of medical treatment is practically out of control. How do you propose to control these costs, and how are you going to provide access to health care for every American? Let's see, whose turn is it to go now? I think it's Admiral Stockdale's turn. Go first. Go ahead.
Well, we have excellent technical health care, but we don't administer it very well. And the escalating costs top any other budget danger in on the horizon, I think. And what Mr. Perot has suggested is that we try to look at the incentives that are in our current way of doing business are what are killing us. There's no incentive for a hypochondriac not to go to Medicare every day. There is no incentive for a doctor to curtail the expensive tests because he's under threat of malpractice lawyers. And so we just have a web of wrong way incentives that has to be changed by some people who are in the medical profession and some other crafty people who know how to write contracts to change incentives or get the incentives situation under control.
Senator Gore.
Bill Clinton and I believe that if a criminal has the right to a lawyer, every American family ought to have the right to see a doctor of their own choosing when they need to see a doctor. There are almost 40 million Americans who work full-time today and yet have no health insurance whatsoever. We are proposing to change that, not with a government-run plan, not with new taxes, but with a new approach called managed competition. We are going to provide a standard health insurance package provided by private insurance companies and eliminate the duplication and red tape and overlap, and we're going to have cost controls to eliminate the unnecessary procedures that are costing so much money today. There was a bipartisan commission, evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats, who looked at our plan and the Bush-Quayle proposal. They said ours will save tens of billions of dollars and cover every American. The Bush proposal, by contrast, will cost us tens of billions and still leave Americans uninsured. But what I want to know is, why has George Bush waited for 3.5 years during this health insurance crisis before finally coming out with a proposal just before the election, and he still hasn't introduced it in Congress? Why the long wait, Dan?
Mr. Vice President?
Al, President Bush has had his health care reform agenda on the Capitol Hill for 8 months. He's had parts of it up there for years. You talk about increasing costs that the President has had on Capitol Hill, medical malpractice reform legislation for several years. Defensive medicine and health care today costs $20.7 billion. Defensive medicine defined as testing and treatment that is only necessary in case of a lawsuit. Wouldn't that be nice to take $20.7 billion that we're putting into our legal system and put it to preventive health care or women's health care or something else besides trial lawyers? But no, you don't want to reform the health care system to drive down costs through medical malpractice. What you're doing, you are talking about a government program. Your program is to ration health care. You said in your statement to see a doctor when you want to see a doctor. When you start rationing health care, there's going to be a waiting line to see a doctor unless it's an emergency. Remember when we rationed energy in this country? Waiting lines at the gasoline stations. The same thing would happen when you ration health care. The President's proposal deals with tax credits, deductions, and purchasing health care in the private sector and making health care affordable and available to every single American.
Admiral Stockdale, would you like to start the discussion period?
Well, I'm out of ammunition on this.
Well, let me talk then, because I've got a couple of things that I want to say.
Senator.
We still didn't get an answer to the question of why George Bush waited for 3.5 years during the national health insurance crisis before he even made a proposal. And it still hasn't been submitted to Congress in the form of legislation. I also want to respond to the question about malpractice. Do you know which state has the lowest malpractice premiums in the entire country? Bill Clinton's Arkansas does, partly because he has passed reform measures limiting the time during which malpractice suits can be filed. In fact, tort claims generally have fallen 10% under Bill Clinton there. But you know, that's not the reason for this health insurance crisis. The reason is we've had absolutely no leadership. Let me tell you about a friend of mine named Mitch Philpott from Marietta, Georgia, not far from here, who Tipper and I met with his family in Johns Hopkins Hospital. Their son Brett was in the bed next to our son, and they couldn't pay their medical bills. They used to live in Atlanta, but they lost their house. And while they were there, both Mitch and his wife lost their jobs because they could not get unpaid leave. We passed legislation to give family leave under circumstances like that, exempting small business. How can you talk about family values, Dan, and twice veto the Family Medical Leave Act?
Vice President?
Pass our Family Leave Act, and because it goes to small businesses, where the major problem is your proposal excluded small business. That's the problem. Now let me talk about health care.
Did you require it? Did you require it?
My turn.
Did you require family
leave? Lighten up, Al. My turn.
It's a free discussion.
Take a breath, Al. Inhale.
It's a free discussion. Did you require family leave in that legislation, yes or no?
We offered incentives to small businesses, yes or no? Were small business exempted under your proposal?
Yes.
Yes, and that's where the biggest problem is.
Did you require it of anyone?
I'm going to get back to the topic
Did you require it of anyone?
Because he obviously doesn't want to talk about health insurance or health care, which you address. I was absolutely, I shouldn't say that. Another Clinton. You pulled another Clinton on me, because here you go again. Medical malpractice legislation has been before the Congress of the United States, and you try to convince the American people that Bill Clinton is for tort reform. The biggest campaign contributors to your campaign are the trial lawyers of America. We have a letter, and we're going to release it again to the media if the media is interested, where the head of the trial lawyers of Arkansas said that Bill Clinton was basically in their back pocket, that Bill Clinton has always opposed tort reform of any kind. It's in the letter. We have it. We'll make it available, because Bill Clinton is not for tort reform. I'd like to know where Bill Clinton stands on health insurance. When he's campaigning in New Hampshire, he says, I am for the pay or play health insurance. Pay or play, that's a 7 to 9% payroll tax on every worker in America that participates in this program.
Can I respond?
And then all of a sudden, this summer, he says, oh, I'm not for a pay or play. Here we go again. Bill Clinton, one day he's for pay or play, the next day he's against pay or play. He does it in education. He writes Polly Williams, a Democrat state legislator in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, saying, I'm for choice in education. Then he goes to the NEA Teachers Union and says, sorry, I'm not for choice in education because you won't let me be for choice in education. One time Bill Clinton says, term limits. We ought to limit terms. It's ridiculous that a member of Congress can serve for 30, 40, 50 years and you limit the terms of the president, but that's another subject.
We're fixing to limit one.
Yeah. We're gonna limit. It's not going to be mine. It's going to be people like you and Kennedy and Metzenbaum and George Mitchell and the rest of that Democratic Congress on Capitol Hill. That's who we're talking about. And that's who the American people, in case, as you well know, you've got term limits for a president. You don't have term limits for Congress, and I think it's absolutely ridiculous that we don't.
I want to respond to some of this.
Here goes Bill Clinton again. He says, well, term limits, that's an interesting idea. I think I might be in favor of that. Then his Democratic friends in Congress say, no, Bill, you can't be for that. You know, Bill Clinton has trouble telling the truth.
I want to respond to some of this.
You have to tell the truth.
I want to respond, if I might.
Go ahead, Senator, quickly.
You know, in response to my question before that long laundry list, he said that they had their own family leave proposal. It was just like the proposal of your party back when Social Security was first proposed. You said, we're for it as long as it's voluntary. Same with Medicare. You said, we're for it so long as it's voluntary. Yeah. Civil rights, we're for it so long as it's voluntary.
Senator, I'm going to have to ask you to wrap this one up.
Family leave is important enough to be required.
Okay, thanks. Coming out of health care, again trying to avoid controversy, let's talk about the abortion debate. Abortion rights has been a bitter controversy in this country for almost 20 years. It's been heightened by the recent Supreme Court decisions. So I'll make it very simple in this question. Where do each of you stand on the issue? What action will your president's administration take on the abortion question? Will it be a factor in the appointment of federal judges, especially to the Supreme Court? And I believe that Senator Gore goes first.
Bill Clinton and I support the right of a woman to choose. That doesn't mean we're pro-abortion. In fact, we believe there are way too many abortions in this country, and the way to reduce them is by reducing the number of unwanted pregnancies, not vetoing family planning legislation the way George Bush has consistently done. The reason we are pro-choice and in favor of a woman's right to privacy is because we believe that during the early stages of a pregnancy, the government has no business coming in and ordering a woman to do what the government thinks is best. What Dan Quayle and George Bush and Jerry Falwell and Pat Robertson think is the right decision in a given set of circumstances is their privilege. But don't have the government order a woman to do what they think is the right thing to do. We ought to be able to build more common ground among those who describe themselves as pro-choice and pro-life in efforts to reduce the number of unwanted pregnancies. But Dan, you can clear this up very simply by repeating after me, I support the right of a woman to choose. Can you say that?
Vice President Quayle, your turn.
Yeah. This issue is an issue that divides Americans deeply. I happen to be pro-life. I have been pro-life for my 16 years in public life. My objective and the President's objective is to try to reduce abortions in this country. We have 1.6 million abortions. We have more abortions in Washington, D.C. than we do live births. Why shouldn't we have more reflection upon the issue before abortion, the decision of abortion is made? I would hope that we would agree upon that, something like a 24-hour waiting period, parental notification. I was in Los Angeles recently and I talked to a woman who told me that she had an abortion when she was 17 years of age. And looking back on that, she said it was a mistake. And she said, I wished at that time that I was going through this difficult time, that I had counseling to talk about the post-abortion trauma and talk about adoption rather than abortion. Because if I had had that discussion, I would have had the child. Let's not forget that every abortion stops a beating heart. I think we have far too many abortions in this country of ours.
Admiral Stockdale.
I believe that a woman owns her body and what she does with it is her own business, period. Period.
That's it.
I too abhor abortions, but I don't think they should be made illegal, and I don't think it's a political issue. I think it's a privacy issue.
Admiral, you caught me by surprise. Let's go ahead with the discussion of this issue. Senator Gore?
Well, you notice in his response that Dan did not say, I support the right of a woman to choose. That is because he and George Bush have turned over their party to Pat Buchanan and Phyllis Schlafly, who have ordered them to endorse a platform which makes all abortions illegal under any circumstances, regardless of what has led to that decision by a woman. Even in cases of rape and incest, their platform requires that a woman be penalized, that she not be allowed to make a choice if she believes, in consultation with her family, her doctor, and others, whoever she chooses, that she wants to have an abortion after rape or incest. They make it completely illegal under any of those circumstances. Now they want to waffle around on it. Let me finish just briefly. Now you want to waffle around on it and give the impression that maybe you don't really mean what you say. But again, you can clear it up by simply repeating, I support the right of a woman to choose. Say it.
Let him say it himself. Let him say his own words. Go ahead, Mr. Vice President.
Talk about waffling around. This issue is a very important issue. It has been debated throughout your public life and throughout my public life. And one thing that I don't think that is wise to do, and that is to change your position. At one time, and most of the time in the House of Representatives, you had a pro-life position.
Simply not
in
true.
1987, you wrote a letter, and we'll pass this out to the media too.
True.
You wrote a letter saying that you oppose taxpayer funding of abortion. Bill Clinton has the same type of a record.
In some circumstances.
No, we're going to qualify it now.
And I still do.
And Bill Clinton, when he was governor of Arkansas, also worked with the right to life people and supported right to life positions, and now he has changed. Talk about waffling around. This is the typical type of Clinton response, even on the issue like abortion. He's on both sides of the issue. Take the NAFTA agreement.
Oh, wait a minute.
How long did he have to just wait?
I know you want to change the subject, Dan, but let's stay on this one for a while.
How long did he have to wait, or how quickly did he change his position on education? He changes his position all the time.
Let's stay with this issue for a while.
Bill Clinton has trouble telling the truth. Now, 3 words he fears most.
Does anybody have any view about the appointment of judges on this?
Yeah, I want to talk about this because the question was not about free trade or education. The question was about.
You're the one that brought up the issue of waffling.
Dan, let me talk now. It's going to be a long evening if you're like this now because.
No,
don't change the subject. Don't change the subject. Because what you have done.
Answer my questions. On the 24-hour waiting period, do you support that?
I have had the same position on abortion in favor of a woman's right to choose. Do you support a woman's right to choose?
Do you support a 24-hour waiting period to have reflection?
You're still avoiding the question. Now, wait a minute. Let me tell you why this is so important. There are millions of women in this country who passionately believe in the right of a woman to privacy. And they want to stack the Supreme Court with justices who will take away the right to privacy. Make no mistake about it, that is their agenda. And if you support them, don't be surprised that that is exactly what they want to do. And that is why Dan Quayle refuses to say this evening that he supports the right of a woman to choose. I agree with Admiral Stockdale and the vast majority of Democrats and Republicans in this country. You know, one of the reasons so many Republicans are supporting the Clinton-Gore ticket is because they've turned over the party to this right-wing extremist group which takes positions on issues like abortion that don't even allow exceptions for rape and incest. Again, can't you just say you support the right of a woman to choose?
Can we give Admiral Stockdale a chance to jump in here if he wants to or if he dares to?
I would like to get in. I feel like I'm an observer at a ping pong game where they're talking about, they're expert professional politicians that massage these intricate plots and know every nuance to them. And meantime, we're facing a desperate situation in our economy. I've seen the cost of living double in my lifetime. A new granddaughter was born in my family, my granddaughter, 3 weeks ago. And according to the statistics that we have, that is the Perot group, the chances of her seeing a doubling of the standard of living are nil. In fact, her children will be dead before another this standard of living is doubled. So what the heck? Let's get on with talking about something substantive.
All right, Mr. Vice President, you'll have a chance to. You'll have a chance in the closing statements. Let's move on to another topic.
Just 15 seconds to respond.
Can I have 15 seconds also?
Let's move on, gentlemen.
I'll tell you what.
All right, let's not. We're not horse trading. We're having a debate. Let's go on. Let's talk about the cities, because that's where a majority of Americans live, in urban areas, and they're facing a financial and social crisis. They've lost sources of tax revenue. The aid that once came from the federal and state governments has been drastically cut. There's an epidemic of drugs, crime, and violence. Their streets, their schools are like war zones. It's becoming increasingly difficult to pay for public education, for transportation, for police and fire protection, the basic services that local government must provide. Now, everybody talks about enterprise zones. That may be part of the solution, but what else are your administrations really going to be willing to do to help the cities? Vice President Quayle, it's your turn to go first.
Well, hell, enterprise zones are important, and it's an idea that the President has been pushing. There's been very strong reluctance with the Democratic Congress. We'll continue to push it. We also want to have home ownership. I was at a housing project in San Francisco several months ago and met with people that were trying to reclaim their neighborhood. They wanted home ownership. They didn't want handouts. And I was with the Democrat mayor of San Francisco who was there supporting our idea. But when you look at the cities and you see the problems we have, crime, drugs, lack of jobs, I also want to point out one of the fundamental problems that we have in our American cities and throughout America today, and that is the breakdown of the American family. I know some people laugh about it when I talk about the breakdown of the family, but it's true. 60% of the kids that are born in our major cities today are born out of wedlock. We have too many divorces. We have too many fathers that aren't assuming their responsibility. The breakdown of the family is a contributing factor to the problems that we have in urban America.
Admiral Stockdale.
I think enterprise zones are good, but I think the problem is deeper than that. I think we are, when I ran a civilization for several years, a civilization of 300 to 400 wonderful men. We had our own laws, we had practically our own constitution, and I was the sovereign for a good bit of that. And I tried to analyze human predicaments in that microcosm of life in the world. And I found out that when I really got down to putting out do's and don'ts, and lots of these included take torture for this and that and this and that, and never take any amnesty for reasons they all understood and went along with. But we had an acronym, BACK US, and each one of those BACK was something for which you had to make them hurt you before you did it. Bowing in public, getting on the radio and so forth. But at the end, it was US, BACK US. You got the double meaning there. But the US could be called United States, but it was unity over self. Loners make out. Somehow we're going to have to get some love in this country between races and between rich and poor. You've got to have leaders, and they're out there who can do this with their bare hands, with working with people on the scene.
Senator Gore, please.
George Bush's urban policy has been a tale of two cities. The best of times for the very wealthy, the worst of times for everyone else. We have seen a decline in urban America under the Bush-Quayle administration. Bill Clinton and I want to change that by creating good jobs, investing in infrastructure, new programs in job training and apprenticeship, welfare reform, to say to a mother with young children that if she gets a good job, her children are not going to lose their Medicaid benefits. Incentives for investment in the inner city area. And, yes, enterprise zones. Vice President Quayle said they're important, but George Bush eliminated them from his urban plan. And then, when they were included in a plan that the Congress passed, George Bush vetoed the enterprise zone law, the law that included them, for one reason: because that same bill raised taxes on those making more than $200,000 a year. Let's face up to it, Dan. Your top priority, really, isn't it, to make sure that the very wealthy don't have to pay any more taxes? We want to cut taxes on middle-income families and raise them on those making more than $200,000 a year. And if we can take our approach, the cities will be much better.
Okay, let's start the discussion period right here. Go ahead.
What plan is that that's just going to raise taxes on those making over $200,000 a year? You may call that your plan, but everyone knows that you simply can't get $150 billion in new taxes by raising the marginal tax rate to a top rate of 36% and only tax those making $200,000 a year. It's absolutely ridiculous. The top 2%, which you refer to, that gets you down to $64,000. Then you have about a $40 billion shortfall. That gets you down to $36,000 a year. Everybody making more than $36,000 a year will have their taxes increase if Bill Clinton is President of the United States. And I don't know how you're going to go to urban America and say that raising taxes is good for you. I don't know how you're going to go to urban America and say, well, the best thing that we want to, or the best thing that we can offer is simply to raise taxes again. This is nothing more than a tax and spend a platform. We've seen it before. It doesn't work. Let me tell you about a story.
Can I respond to some of that?
I've got a very good example.
Can I respond to some of that?
When we talk about families here. because I was meeting with some former gang members in Phoenix, in Los Angeles, and Albuquerque, New Mexico. And when I talked to those former gang members, here's what they told me, why they joined the gang. They said, well, joining a gang is like joining a family. I said, joining a family? Yes, because the gang offered support, it offered leadership, it offered comfort. It was a way to get ahead. Where have we come if joining a gang is like being a member of the family? And
Senator
that's
Gore,
why
you wanted
I
to
think
respond?
families have to be strengthened, and you don't strengthen the American family by raising taxes.
Go ahead.
I do want to respond
Go ahead,
to that.
Senator. Admiral.
George Bush and Dan Quayle want to protect the very wealthy. That is the group that has gotten all of the tax cuts under the Bush-Quayle administration. Nobody here who is middle income has gotten a tax cut, because middle income families have had tax increases under Bush and Quayle in order to finance the cuts for the very wealthy. That's what trickle-down economics is all about, and they want to continue it. We're proposing to also require foreign corporations to pay the same taxes that American corporations do when they do business here in the United States of America. George Bush has not been willing to enforce the laws and collect those taxes. We want to close that loophole and raise more money in that way.
And when
you talk about, excuse me?
Stick to the cities.
All right. Well, he talked about ways to raise money to help the cities. What we're proposing is to invest in the infrastructure in cities and have targeted tax incentives for investment right in inner city areas. The enterprise zones represent a part of our proposal also, and strengthening the family through welfare reform. And you know, the Bush administration has vetoed family leave. They have cut childhood immunization and college aid. If you don't support parents and you don't support children, how can you say you support families?
How about supporting parents and the right to choose where their kids go to school, Al? You support that? Let the parents, let the parents.
Do you want me to answer?
Public or private schools?
Want me to answer?
Choice.
We support the public school choice to go to any public school of your choice. What we don't support, and listen to what they're proposing, to take U.S. taxpayer dollars and subsidize private schools. Now, I'm all for private schools, but to use taxpayer dollars when the people who get these little vouchers often won't be able to afford the private school anyway, and the private school is not under any obligation to admit them, that is a ripoff of the U.S. taxpayer.
This is a very important issue. Choice in education is a very important issue. And he said that he was not for choosing to, giving the parents the right to choose to send their kids to public schools. But it's okay for the wealthy to choose to send their kids to private schools, but it's not okay for the middle class and the working poor to choose where they want to send their kids to school. I think that it's time that all parents in America have a right to choose where they send their kids to school to get an education.
Admiral Stockdale, would you like to have the last word in this period?
I come down on the side of freedom of school choice. And there's a lot of misunderstandings that I've heard here tonight that I may have the answer to. Starting in, for the last almost a decade, we've worried about our schools officially through Washington, and the president had a meeting of all the governors, and then they tried the conventional fixes for schools, that is to increase the certification of requirements for the teachers, to lengthen the school day, to lengthen the school year. Nothing, this is a very brief overview of the thing, but nothing happened. And it's time to change the school structure. In schools, bureaucracy is bad and autonomy is good. The only good schools we have are those run by talented principals and devoted teachers. And they're running their own show. How many times have I thrived? You know, the best thing I had when I ran that civilization, it succeeded, and it's a landmark. The best thing I had going for me was I had no contact with Washington for all those years.
We have to go on. What I'm about to say doesn't apply to the debate tonight. It applies to the campaign that's been going on outside this auditorium. With 3 weeks to go, this campaign has at times been very ugly. with the tone being set by personal negative attacks. As candidates, how does it look from your viewpoint, and are these tactics really necessary? Admiral Stockdale, it's your turn to go.
You know,
first.
I didn't have my hearing aid turned on. Tell me again.
I was saying that at times this campaign has been very ugly with personal negative attacks. As a candidate, how does it look from where you are, and are these tactics really necessary?
Nasty attacks. Well, I think there is a case to be made for putting emphasis on character over these issues that we have been batting back and forth and have a life of their own. Sure, you have to know where you're going with your government, but character is the big variable in the success. The character of the leaders is the big variable in the success, long-term success of an administration. I went to a friend of mine in New York some years ago, and he was a president of a major network, TV network, and he said, you know, I think we have messed up this election process. It was an election year by stressing that putting out the dogma that issues are the thing to talk about, not character. He said, I felt so strongly about this, I went back and read the Lincoln-Douglas debates. Read those debates. How do they come down? Douglas is all character. He knows all of the little stinky numbers these guys do. Abraham Lincoln had character. Thank God we got the right president in the Civil War. But that is a question that is a valid one. And you know, I would like to brag about the character of my boss.
Senator Gore.
This election is about the future of our country, not about personal attacks against one candidate or another. Our nation is in trouble, and it is appalling to me that with 10 million Americans out of work, with the rest working harder for less money than they did 4 years ago, with the loss of 1.4 million manufacturing jobs in our nation, with a health care crisis, a crisis of crime and drugs and AIDS, substandard education, that George Bush would constantly try to level personal attacks at his opponent. Now, this, of course, just reached a new low last week when he resorted to a classic McCarthyite technique of trying to smear Bill Clinton over a trip that he took as a student, along with lots of other Rhodes Scholars who were invited to go to Russia. It's a classic McCarthyite smear technique. I think the President of the United States ought to apologize. I think that he insulted the intelligence of the American people, and I'm awful proud that the American people rejected that tactic so overwhelmingly that he decided he had made a mistake. Do you think it was a mistake too, Dan?
Okay. Vice President Quayle.
Let me answer the question. Hal, you said, and I wrote it down here, personal negative attacks. Has anyone been reading my press clippings for the last 4 years? But I agree with one thing on with Senator Gore, and that is that we ought to look to the future. And the future is who's going to be the next president of the United States. And is it a negative attack and a personal attack to point out that Bill Clinton simply has trouble telling the truth? You know, he said that he didn't organize, or he didn't even demonstrate. He told the people in Arkansas in 1978. Then we found out he organized demonstrations. You know, I don't care whether he demonstrated or didn't demonstrate. The question is, tell the truth. Just tell us the truth. Today, Bill Clinton, or yesterday in Philadelphia on a radio show, just yesterday on a radio show, he attacks Admiral. He attacks Ross Perot, saying the media is giving Ross Perot a free ride. The press asked him when the Klieg lights are on, said, what do you mean by Ross Perot getting a free ride? He says, I didn't say that at all. I mean, you can't have it both ways. No, I don't think that is a personal attack. What I find troubling with Bill Clinton is he can't tell the truth. You cannot lead this great country of ours by misleading the people.
All right, gentlemen, the control room advises me that in order to have time for your closing statements, which we certainly want, there simply is not going to be time for a discussion period on this particular topic. So let's go to the closing statements. You have 2 minutes each, and we'll start with Admiral Stockdale.
I think the best justification for getting Ross Perot in the race again and to stay is that we're seeing this kind of chit-chat back and forth about issues that don't concentrate on where our grandchildren are going, with the living standards of our children and grandchildren. He is, as I've read in more than one article, a revolutionary. He's got plans out there that are going to double the speed at which this budget problem is being cared for. It was asked how, if we would squeeze down so fast that we would strangle the economy in the process. That is an art to follow all those variables and know when to let up and to nurse this economy back together with pulls and pushes. And that there's no better man in the world to do that than that old artist Ross Perot. And so I think that my closing statement is that I think I'm in a room with people that aren't living the life of reality. The world the United States is in deep trouble. We've got to have somebody that can get up there and bring out the fire hoses and get it stopped, and that's what we're about in the Perot campaign.
Thank you. Senator Gore, your closing statement, sir?
3 weeks from today, our nation will make a fateful decision. We can continue traveling the road we have been on, which has led to higher unemployment and worse economic times, or we can reach out for change. If we choose change, it will require us to reach down inside ourselves to find the courage to take a new direction. Sometimes it seems deceptively easy to continue with the old habits even when they're no longer good for us. Trickle-down economics simply does not work. We have had an increase in all of the things that should be decreasing. Everything that should have been increasing has been going down. We have got to change direction. Bill Clinton offers a new approach. He has been named by the other 49 governors, Republicans and Democrats alike, as the best and most effective governor in the entire United States of America. He's moved 17,000 people off the welfare rolls and onto payrolls. He has introduced innovations in health care and education. And again, he has led the nation for the last 2 years in a row in the creation of jobs in the private sector. Isn't it time for a new approach, a new generation of ideas and leadership to put our nation's people first and to get our economy moving again? We simply cannot stand to continue with this failed approach that is no good for us. Ultimately, it is a choice between hope and fear, a choice between the future and the past. It is time to reach out for a better nation. We are bigger than George Bush has told us we are as a nation, and we have a much brighter future. Give us a chance. With your help, we'll change this country, and we can't wait to get started.
Vice President Quayle.
Thank you, Hal. I'd like to use this closing statement to talk to you about a few people that I've met in these last 4 years. Think of a woman in Chicago when I was talking to parents about education, where she stood up and said, "I'm sick and tired of these schools in this city being nothing but a factory for failure." And that's why we support choice in education. I was in Beaumont, Texas, and met with small business people, and they wanted to reform the civil justice system because they think our legal system costs too much and there's too much of a delay in getting an answer. I was in Middletown, Ohio, talking to a welfare woman where she said, "I want to go back to work and I had a job offered to me, but I'm not going to take it because I have 2 children at home and the job that is offered to me doesn't have health insurance." Under President Bush's health care reform package, that woman won't have to make a choice about going back to work or health care for her children because she'll have both. I was in Vilnius, Lithuania, Independence Square, speaking to 10,000 people in the middle of winter. Hundreds of people came up to me and said, "God bless America." Yes, in the next 4 years, as I said, somewhere, sometime, there's going to be a crisis. And you need to have a president that is qualified, has the experience, and has been tested. Not one time during this evening, during 90 minutes, did Al Gore tell us why Bill Clinton is qualified to be president. He never answered my charges that Bill Clinton has trouble telling the truth. The choice is yours. The American people should demand that their president tell the truth. Do you really believe Bill Clinton will tell the truth? And do you trust Bill Clinton to be your president?
That concludes this vice presidential debate. I'd like to thank Vice President Quayle, Senator Gore, Admiral Stockdale for being participants. The next presidential debate is scheduled for this Thursday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time at the University of Richmond in Richmond, Virginia. To all of our viewers and listeners, thank you and good night.
Admiral.
And so ends the vice presidential debate. We're going to take just a minute or two here to get some quick impressions. Yours at home are the ones that count, essentially, but out there in Atlanta, or down there in Atlanta, from a New York point of view, ABC's Jeff Greenfield has been listening. Impressions, Jeff?
I thought this was one of the best public performances that Dan Quayle has given. He came here with a mission, to use a George Bush phrase. He defined it in the opening statement. He said, I'm going after Bill Clinton on basic issues of integrity and trust, and he hammered away on it over and over again. For his own sake, he was more in command of materials on an ad-lib basis than I've seen him before. And I must say to you two quick other things. First, Al Gore, a very good debater, seemed to be very programmed. No matter what Dan Quayle would say, Gore would take a breath and say, Bill Clinton and I believe that. I wonder how that struck the audience at home, whether it seemed assured or programmed. And unlike Ross Perot, who really helped Bill Clinton, Stockdale helped Dan Quayle by really undercutting Al Gore on points on the environment, on defense, and on the character issue. The irony is, of course, that people don't vote for vice presidents. That's what the Republicans were saying 4 years ago. I have a feeling some Democrats are grateful for that tonight.
I wonder if you think, Jeff, that Admiral Stockdale was an asset to Ross Perot, as you mentioned, that these men are intended to, well, let's keep looking at them, I think is probably more interesting, as they are here tonight to try to help the top of the ticket.
Well, I think that's right. I think clearly Admiral Stockdale, as a newcomer to the scene, you have to forgive him the fact, and maybe it's a charming thing, he doesn't have the kind of presence that two veteran politicians do. In fact, a couple of times Admiral Stockdale got off a very good point about the anti-politician theme of Perot by saying, this is why we have gridlock, and I feel like I have watching a ping pong match.
And at one point I thought I heard him say that his hearing aid was off.
Yes.
And I wondered whether or not he might have turned it off deliberately.
Well, I think it's the sort of thing that a lot of people would like to do when they hear politicians. But I think we need to come back to this one point. 4 years ago, Dan Quayle was the issue for the Democrats. He was the vulnerability in a race that Bush was leading. Because George Bush is so weak, the strength that Dan Quayle showed tonight may ironically be somewhat less important than it would have been had Quayle performed like this in 1988.
Okay, Jeff, thanks very much. Just want to make a recommendation to our audience as they take a last glimpse at Georgia Tech down here in Atlanta. There have been a lot of fairly vigorous charges tonight, which both campaigns will wish to document or support. We've been trying to do it as we go along, and we won't take the time to comment on it now, but some of the charges made this evening are not accurate. So perhaps our best recommendation to you at home is to take a look at your newspaper tomorrow morning, or watch the television and listen to the radio. Listen to Nightline later this evening when they'll take a closer look at this debate, as the charges and countercharges this evening are documented. As Admiral Stockdale said, in listening to the two candidates, there was in this evening a lot of misunderstanding, but also a very lot of strong impressions. I'm Peter Jennings. Thanks for being with us.
This has been the 92 Vote, ABC News coverage of the vice presidential debate. This has been a special presentation of ABC News. More Americans get their news from ABC News than from any other source. Next.
What? No dip?
For a really great Halloween, pick up tons of Pepsi and Doritos.
Tonight at 10, we begin a very important series.
I've got some puppies out in my car, and I'm trying to give them away.
It's a series that will probably shock you, but more importantly, it could save your child's life.
But do you know?